All right, guys. So you guys asked a bunch of questions. You did exactly what I asked for, which is fantastic. So thank you for that. And I will try to do a good job of sort of as we do more videos and there are more comments with questions about performance. I kind of try to keep track of those and we can kind of answer them collectively in these videos. So we can have like these kind of community ask questions. Here's the video, and here we are. So this is number one, and I apologize if I missed your question from yesterday's video. So the first question is from Ilyas Butev, 3830. I probably said that wrong, so sorry if I did. The comment was, I spent 300 hours aim training in Kovacs and other aim trainers. I recently ranked up to Voltaic Master, so congrats on that. That's really, really good. The moments when I miss in-game affects my mental harder, as I specifically trained prior to that moment so much. Also, thinking I am better and peaking everyone, and consequently dying in disadvantageous situations makes it worse. The loop is inescapable. So it's a great question, and there's two parts to this. One is the first part of the question, which is more about the approach to how you think about aim in the game and how you think about your performance. And then the second part of the question is a mental game aspect, which is all about like making having this focus be in the incorrect place, and then that creating pressure on you, and then you wanting to overcompensate. So that's kind of an ABC game concept, actually. So we'll talk about both of those things. And what you'll find, and because based on what I'm seeing in a lot of the questions I selected, there's a lot of kind of overlapping themes. So to answer the first part of the question, we have to be really cautious when we are playing that we don't overemphasize aim in our minds. And there's a few different reasons. Reason number one is because aim is going to be inherently inconsistent. And when you're playing an aim trainer, it's a fairly consistent environment. You're able to repeat the same task. You're able to shoot hundreds of targets within a minute. There's a lot of repetition that's involved. So it kind of feels like you have a pretty good sense of what your aim is. You're going to have relatively similar scores in most cases on whatever task you're playing. So it's a pretty consistent environment. When you're playing an actual game, the environment's very inconsistent. And not only that, there are types of pressures and other random variables that you just don't have in an aim trainer. Variables such as your teammates, such as the skill of the opponents, such as the kinds of positions you're finding. Maybe you're in a game where you're not getting as many good spots to actually have a good performance, or to have, let's say, an advantageous engagement. Maybe you yourself have pretty poor positioning, and maybe that's a leak of yours. So generally, the fights that you have to win are a lot harder. So there's loads of different elements, the game sense component, where you have to have this awareness of the timings in the micro environments, like, the in-fight, like the 1v1s, the 2v2s types of situations where you're thinking, okay, he sees my position, I know what his position is, he has time to do this, he's just taking cover, so he has these two options, and he's going to think about my options, and he thinks I'm going to do this and this, so I think I've narrowed it down, he's going to most likely do this, so I'm going to do a little counterplay by predicting what he's going to do, and then I don't see him at this timing that I would have expected him, so now I have to think ahead, what is his next timing, that so you're thinking about all these like in-fight timings, these tiny little timings, you're trying to get these timing advantages on position to get a better spot than them to win the fight. That's like an example of game sense with your awareness of understanding the game really well, but also understanding the timings and being able to read your opponent. So that's a really cool dynamic, and you're doing that in the game. You're not doing that in an aim trainer. Also, you're doing that from a macro point of view as well. You're looking at the entire map. You're looking at, okay, what are the timings of the team based on their kind of positioning, what and sort of the composition and some of the rounds. What are the most likely things that could happen? How should I best position myself relative to my team? So there's like a lot of stuff just there. Then you've got communication, and you've got like a lot of other factors that go into actually performing really well. So when we talk about thinking about our aim is really a secondary thing to be thinking about. What we want to do is rewire our brains a little bit. We want to focus on, did I make a good decision? And we want to forget about aim, because aim is going to be inconsistent. Why focus on something that's inconsistent? We can't control if we hit that shot every time. We just can't. And what actually makes it more unlikely that we could hit that shot every time is by over focusing on it, because it's supposed to be a secondary kind of soft focus, like subconscious kind of thing. It's supposed to be secondary to the actual thinking of all these different timings and processing the decision and executing the decision and figuring out what is the next decision, what's the next thing that's going to happen, what's the next position I'm going to go to after this. I hold this angle for a specific amount of time. I'm communicating to my teammates, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So it needs to be secondary and kind of And what you'll find is, and what can be a good guide to these kinds of things, like what can confirm what I'm just saying is, whenever, hopefully, you've experienced this feeling, maybe you already have, when you're playing your best, what's happening? Do you think about your aim? No, you don't. And you also kind of don't have a reason to think about it because you're probably hitting your shots. So, and this is the thing, is that what you're experiencing is a mental game leak, because you're finding that when you're not hitting your shots, you're becoming really aware of it to a degree that's making you over focus on it. And then the second part of the question is, now we're overcompensating. So we're making plays to essentially compensate for the fact that, well, I've invested myself in aim training so heavily, I should be able to win these fights. I should be able to outskill my opponent. I should be able to win the game that way. But we have to accept that that's not how you can consistently win the game. There are some games like that where you can kind of really heavily bully people with mechanics. And to some extent, you can do that in a game even like Valorant. But Valorant has a kind of a closer, like, the mechanical skill ceiling is lower than some of the other attack shooters. And because of the abilities and the way they work, and just and how it is a lot easier for people to kill you than in some other games, it is not as easy to like bully people with mechanics. So, and also it's not a good habit to get into, to try to do that. You want to be a player that has really sick mechanics, but you want to be a player that has like the best decision making first. Because if you want to boil it down to how do you win in anything, winning in anything comes down to creating more advantages and executing and kind of converting them more than your opponent can. That's basically, if you can boil it down to how do you win, is you have more advantages and you convert on them more consistently than your opponent. That's it. That's how you win. So we want to, again, rewire our brains to fix the approach. Let's not focus on aim. Let's instead not think about the outcome either. Just, you should be thinking, instead of thinking, oh shit, I missed that shot, my aim feels really shit, think about, did I make the best decision? Should I have taken that fight? Was that a good fight? Did I have the advantage in that fight? Or if I didn't have the advantage in that fight, was it a good risk to take? Because sometimes you have like a fight that maybe it's like 20% chance to win that fight, and you do need to have like a lot of skill, or maybe they need to miss a shot for it to go well. But if you waited, maybe because you're more risk averse or hesitant, which I see this with worse players a lot, like lower level players, they kind of wait to try to make the most safe choice. You actually now are in a 10% chance instead of a 20%. So you still have a shit level of odds, and now it just got way more shit. So you want to time it so you have the best possible risk, even if that's kind of shitty. So you need to be able to kind of know, is that risk I took good? And the best way to do this is obviously to have like, more of a focus on decision making overall. So I hope that was helpful. Just to recap it, focus not on aim if you possibly can, and know that an aim is inherently inconsistent and it will be different day to day, and you cannot control that. Even though you've just owned all of these different targets, you've hit like 100 targets in like, or like 1,000 targets in 5 minutes in your aim trainer, you're going to get relatively like very little targets to shoot in comparison, and there's way more going on to hitting any of those targets. So you hitting a shot or not has a lot less to do with aim than you really think. So think about decision making instead. Make it so that your aim is more of a subconscious, like secondary system, and that in reality, the only thing that you can truly control, like more consistently, is your decision making. So focus on that. So hopefully that'll help you. Because and so I'm going to go through this on the next question, but what also applies to this is the ABC game. So and I have a video on that which explores it a bit. So the second question is from Watch Videos 2714. My biggest mental game block is that I know I can play at a certain level, and when I don't play at that level, I snowball and play worse because I get in my head. Okay, beautiful. We've been set up for the ABC game discussion, which applies to that previous question too. It's generally a very important universal concept, and it's very liberating. For those of you that haven't already heard of this on my channel or from Jared Tendler's work, who I got these ideas from initially, I heard of this from Elige when I interviewed him on a podcast many, many years ago. And then I realized he learned them from Jared Tendler. So I went straight to the source. I have 2 interviews with Jared Tendler on my channel, and I've read his books. I've advised you to do the same if you're really, really curious about this concept and the emotional and mental game stuff. I think he's the best. So ABC game is, you have a range of your performance. So your performance is like, if you were to define your performance, what is it? Well, it has to be a range. Why do we know that? Because each day we sit down at the PC, we're going to be playing differently. Our performance will be different. And there's loads of different reasons for that. One is because the games we play are pretty complex. So there's lots of different variables, and we cannot be perfect at everything, and there will be some level of randomness. And then two, the human element. We are kind of, as human beings, like, just we're inconsistent in pretty much every single thing possible, more or less. So we need to understand that. And so why is that important? It's important because if we understand we have a range, well, that means it's possible for us to be like over here in the shit end of the range in our C game, where we're really bad. We're sleepy, we're tired, we're over peaking, we are, we're slow, our reactions are slow, we're communicating very little, we are, essentially just making lots of mistakes. And then you have your like A game all the way over here, and that's when you're in your flow and that's like when you're in your flow state. That's when you're like, you don't have to think about anything, you're predicting everything really well, you're hitting your shots, you're feeling really good, you're energized, you're communicating really well, you're reading the macro and the micro really well, all this kind of stuff. So that's the best, that's the worst. Well, there's all this stuff in the middle. And so we like to kind of separate it in a more simplistic fashion of saying C, B, and A, B, and C. And so if you accept that your performance is a range, then anytime you sit down at the desk on a given day, you're going to be somewhere in that range, and you can't control that necessarily. What you can do is, once you've accepted this fact, and you can be curious about the ways that you're shit, which is important. Be curious about the ways that you suck, because much like the video from yesterday where I talked about Jocko Willink's reframing tool of good. Oh, I missed a shot or I made a bad decision. Good, because what does that tell me about my performance range? Well, okay, now it's telling me more and more and more about the reality of where I am worse as a player. That, like, more and more information on these things gives me the opportunity, which is good, to be able to fix those things, which is also good. These are things that Jocko had in that video, which if you guys watched it. So that's really important and really key. So going back to the question, my biggest mental block is I know I can play at a certain level, and when I don't play that level, I snowball and play worse. This is the problem a lot of people have. They have this unrealistic expectation that I should be at this certain level because I want to, because I was at a certain point. Let's be real. You're a human being. Just track how many times, your performance wasn't there. How many times was your performance there? Like, we're going to have, our consistency is going to be like this. That's what this range is. We're going to be somewhere in this range. So to create consistency, what you do is you strengthen. Obviously, you want to keep working on strengths always, but you really want to focus on those weaknesses, because as you focus on those weaknesses, suddenly your range gets closer together, and now you're more consistent. So you're much more likely to play as you might expect. And so that's what the power of the ABC game is because it's liberating, because you can just sit down and just be like, whoa, this is me. And anything I do right now, you can't do anything wrong. You cannot do anything wrong. You can't. You're making mistakes, but we just decided that's not wrong. That's more information to help you know what to work on. Because when you fix that thing, whatever that thing is, well, now that's not hopefully not going to be an issue anymore. And so now you're better as a player. If you instead take the route of just denying what the reality is and like, oh, I'm making this mistake and I'm angry because I should be making that mistake. Let's actually take a second to step back. That's really irrational, isn't it? It's like we're getting angry that we're not just what we've decided that we wanted to be in that moment. That's ridiculous, isn't it? And by the way, like, going through this exercise to kind of talk back to these ideas like this is in the school of cognitive behavioral therapy. This is the kind of like idea that human beings tend to have distorted thoughts, and that one way of managing that effectively is to undistort them, basically by talking back to them. And generally it tends to be something that it creates a reaction. There's a stimulus and you react and you feel and think a certain way. And so if you're able to kind of because we have this knowledge of what the problems are because we experience them, now we can kind of plan ahead and be like, okay, I'm thinking about this. Is this really rational? What are the ways I can like think about this? And then maybe you've maybe taken some stuff from this video, and next time you get into that situation, you're like, oh yeah, he said this. Yeah, actually, it's actually not so bad, and you don't feel as bad. And then now you don't get stuck in this loop where you're feeling bad about your game, and then because you're feeling bad about your game, you're more likely to make mistakes because you're more likely to try to compensate, and to compensate is really to make mistakes. So there you go. There's the ABC game concept. I hope that's helpful. Again, Jared Tendler's book, The Mental Game of Trading, is excellent to really go deep on understanding where the leaks are and how to create a system to define this. And I'm going to make some more videos on this concept because it's really key, I think. Okay, so user TE7PV8XW2K asked, you have any advice for overthinking your aim? When I zone out, my aim is absolutely insane, but 99% of the time I just overthink my aim to the point where I can't hit someone standing still facing the other way. So this is funny because we kind of just answered this question with the last two questions. You can see the similarities here. So it's very much like an ABC game type of thing where it's like we're over focusing on aim type of thing too. All of these different kinds of concepts. And so one of the most important things with this is again to understand that aiming is a secondary system, and what happens when someone's not actually facing you is you become hyper aware of the fact that, oh, I'm not having to think about any of these other factors or like how he's going to dodge or already anything. I have no information to understand what he's going to do. So now I'm just like super focused on aiming, and oh my god, what if I miss this guy that's standing still? And this is like one of the phenomena that we have of like why it can be so hard to aim at someone that has no idea where they're in a fight with us. So we are brought into this place where we are over focusing on our aim naturally, and so that's why that's actually challenging. At least that is my best answer as to why that kind of thing actually happens. And you become hyper focused on aim, and it takes you out of this secondary system of aiming where I'm just going through the motion on decisions, and it brings you into like a very hard focus as opposed to like the soft focus where all the subconscious kind of I'm just kind of doing it automatically. And now you're trying to like take over the autopilot, and you're trying to pilot it yourself, and it's not going to go as well. So hopefully that kind of helps you there, plus the answers to the previous questions. Next question from Framelessly. I get stuck in my own head a lot. I'm way too hard on myself, even after a small mistake. So we can go to the video from yesterday where we talked about reframing tools. So if you make a mistake, good. Why? Because of as we covered in previous questions. If we look at the ABC game, well, we just learned something about our performance range. We're just getting more data on the range of our performance. We're just getting more and more data, and we're learning more about ourselves. We're being more curious about ourselves. Oh, I actually wanted to know that. If you make a mistake, think to yourself, like, I wanted to know that. What if I see a pattern? Well, if I take more care and like really try to understand these things, you'll have most likely, and through accepting these things, a way easier path in actually fixing them. So you make a mistake, good. Much like Jocko Willink would say, so we hit the ABC game there as well as the mental reframing. And I compare myself to others too much. Very similar to the ABC game thing, where we're just accepting our own performance. We are who we are in the game and what we're able to do, and we're nothing else. We cannot think in a way where we're trying to create expectations because of comparisons or really anything else. You can do that, but the problem is that it's not helpful to you, and that's something that you need to try to understand too. Is what's the most helpful to you? What are your goals? And if your goals are to get better, well, it's not rational to think that you could do that by trying to compare yourself to somebody else, because it's kind of like going to the gym and being like, oh man, that guy's lifting like 300 pounds and I can only lift 100 pounds. It's like, well, it's all relative ultimately, and the judgment that you're kind of or maybe even some of the shame that you're experiencing with that comparison, because you're kind of ashamed of how everyone's so much better than me and they're going to think they're judging me. This could be a projection of your own insecurity about where your performance is. And so this is why it's so important to learn to love your performance, learn to love yourself, learn to love your performance, learn to love your journey, because your journey is unique to you and you get to solve the problems in your journey. Nobody else does. So you need to learn to love that journey and love the process of trying to be curious about it and accepting mistakes. And I'm not saying, you're going to be perfectly zen. It's going to be very challenging. I think if you set up all the systems in the right way, and if you're taking this stuff really seriously and you do everything right, I think you can be generally fairly zen, because there's a lot of like really good guidelines I think that exist now to do that if you're taking it super seriously. But for most of us, we're going to be playing probably a little bit more casually, so you're going to experience some negative emotions, and that's fine. But hopefully, some of these ideas help to take the edge off when you're running into these scenarios. Okay, we're almost through. Almost at 20 minutes. Okay. Chow Cubehead 1489. I've got to scroll down here as well. Asks, I have a question. How do I get into the habit of practicing or streaming? I'm procrastinating. I want to overlay this or that, and I never get around to streaming. So this is definitely going to be, I think, a larger topic on a video, because I have something coming in the future about, mindset, goals, and these types of things, because what can be really easy to do, and this is like a simple question, but it can be a little bit more complicated because it can kind of depend on the person. But generally, the most important thing is to look at a task and think about, how can I start taking action on the task, and And if there are certain things, like let's say that I defined overlays, all these types of things. If those things generally feel like those are discouraging, don't do overlays then. Just do the thing that's important. And the reason is because the principle is that taking action is far more important than any of the other things. Because you can eventually fix those things, but you can't fix just not doing the thing at all. And part of the principle of taking action that's transformative too is that these things are habitual. Like the more that you do something, the more habitual it will become. So if you have some level of resistance, once you've kind of nailed down like one part and you've been able to kind of get the action going, you're creating the momentum, you're creating that kind of kinetic energy, that force that will kind of help to propel you forward because you're starting to actually enjoy it because you're reaping the rewards of doing something. Because generally speaking, when we're productive in any way, it's going to give us a feedback that's positive, and we can kind of use that kind of resource of that positive energy that's coming back to us from that productivity to reinvest into that activity if we want to, or maybe something else. But generally speaking, you need to kind of get yourself going and taking action. So look at all the things that are difficult, and be creative if you possibly can, and see, is there a way I can reduce the resistance to doing this, and just prioritize the actual doing of the main thing, even if that's like without the overlays or whatever else. And I think this really goes for anything. It's like eating well, or exercise, all these different things. Just start doing something, and the rest will kind of follow. And you also got to be honest with yourself too. If you're finding yourself just not doing stuff, you have to be honest and say, do I actually care about this? And or am I just trying to kind of live the fantasy of being the person that's like, oh, I want to do this, but I just don't. So something to think about. Okay, so lastly, Splaram asks, how do I play around teammates that no com and do their own thing? Most infuriating thing in such a team-based game. To cue the mode where you're supposed to try your best to win and get people who stay silent the entire game and only turn on the mics to flame. Literally a waste of 30 minutes when I'm trying to get quality VODs to review. So this is definitely, there's definitely some strategies for this. Ultimately, it kind of comes down to your goal. So you mentioned that you're trying to get quality VODs to review. Yeah, I'm not sure precisely what you're looking for with regards to the VODs, and maybe that is going to be a wash. But there are lots of ways that you can kind of work around this, and ways you can reframe this into a good situation. So if you have teammates that don't com and they're doing their own thing, what you're actually getting like this kind of interesting like isolation training on having to really force yourself to be even better at reading the macro, reading the minimap constantly, because you're not getting any comms. And the thing is that reading the minimap constantly, some of the absolute best players in the world are that good because they are doing that, because they found systems where they can do that continuously, and they're getting this continuously updated information. And what's really powerful about that is it allows you to continually be in this mode of like making decisions, because every time you get the information, you have to make a decision. Do I do something with that information or not? And also, when you're like looking at where your teammates are constantly, it allows you to have more updated takes of, should I reposition because my teammate's doing this thing? And if you also accept that I think they're going to do whatever they're going to do, then you can try to like play off of what they're doing, and you can try to find creative solutions on the fly, stuff that might not be optimal, but this is the whole point, is that you're getting thrown random shit and you're having to try to make the best out of it. And so this can be a good exercise. The thing is that oftentimes what happens is we land into these practice scenarios where we're wanting to practice certain things, but the environment's not giving us what we want. So there's two options there. One, you can just hope for the thing that you can't get, or two, you actually try to get the thing that's in front of you and figure out where the value is, and then focus on that and identify that and then pursue that. So that's really what you kind of have to do in those scenarios. Because the other thing too with these types of teammates is you have to remember, especially with ranked, there's this social contract. There's no social contract basically saying that you have to do this or do that, or you have to try, or you have to com, there's expectations because they're playing ranked, everyone's playing for their ranks and stuff. But the thing is that we can't, people are people. Like someone might have just received some really shitty news about their life, and they just want to play some Valorant. They really love the game, and it's their way that they unwind. Someone might be like really like hyper and young, and is in that idiot phase where they're going to say lots of like stupid stuff and be a dick to people, and maybe they're not going to be like that in a couple of years. Some people might be really just like really good aim, or they might be deciding that they just want to troll that day. Like, you can't control. It's not reasonable to try to control other people or their experience in a ranked game. It would be more reasonable if you're playing a scrim and you have a team, because in a team there's a social contract. There's the expectation of conduct that you've all agreed upon, either explicitly or implicitly. So then, that's kind of cool because you can obviously optimize that, and that's what really being in a team is all about. Is having like a high quality high quality of operational standards that everyone adheres to get like a really like efficient machine working. So that's my answer to that one. Find the value where it is. And for me in that situation, I always like take it as like, okay, I can see this person's only coming to maybe say stupid stuff that's actually not valuable. It hits the no value category. They're going to be trolling. I'm going to turn their mics off because I want to have the best chance to focus on what I want to focus on, which is the valuable information, which maybe is just from the minimap. And I'm going to try my best to kind of make this work and see what I can get from it and really focus on those particular skills. And, it also depends on you as to whether you decide that you want to habituate having good comms regardless of the situation. That's a very like good habit to have. A lot of people struggle to do that when their teammates are being dicks, and especially if you mute your team. But if you want to really habituate really high level comms and you see it as a skill, then it's something that you should also consider. And there's a good opportunity there as well. Is you can still work on your comms, and that can still be part of the VOD that you make. Is how are you comming, and are you happy with that too? So there you go. With all that said, hopefully this was a good kind of first edition of answering questions. We're about 26 minutes here on this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, please subscribe and keep the comments coming. I really like to see it, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.